The smell of roasted turkey used to mean safety to me. Butter, sage, onions caramelizing in a pan, my mother's sharp voice floating from the kitchen like she was conducting an orchestra no one else could hear. Thanksgiving in our house wasn't cozy, it was competitive. The table wasn't set for gratitude, it was set for performance. And this year, I already knew I was going to lose. I stood in my childhood bedroom that afternoon, staring at my reflection in the same oval mirror that had watched me grow up. The wallpaper was still pale blue, the carpet still smelled faintly like dust and old perfume, but I didn't belong here anymore. Downstairs, I could hear my sisters laugh, bright, polished, confident. Alina had arrived early, of course. She always did. She liked the entrance. She liked the applause before the meal. "Mom, the wine from Napa is in the car," she called. My mother's voice rose instantly, proud and sharp. "Of course it is, sweetheart. You always bring the best." I closed my eyes for a second. Of course she did. Alina was the best. Elena the attorney, Elena the headline, Elena whose face had appeared in a business magazine last spring with the caption, "The youngest partner in firm history." I had clipped the article, not because I was proud, because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the difference in how the world treated us. I walked downstairs slowly. The house looked exactly the same. Cream walls, heavy wooden dining table, crystal serving dishes my mother only used when there was an audience. My father was already seated in the living room, watching football, pretending not to hear the tension humming in the kitchen. Elena stood at the island, wearing a tailored burgundy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her dark hair fell in soft waves, perfectly styled but effortless enough to look accidental. She saw me and smiled. "Oh my God, you made it!" Her hug was light, careful, like she didn't want my reality to wrinkle her outfit. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She stepped back and looked me up and down. "You look comfortable." Translation, not impressive. I was wearing black slacks and a sweater I'd bought on clearance. "I like to breathe," I replied lightly. She laughed like it was a joke. Mom entered the room carrying a tray of glasses. She paused when she saw me. There it was, that microsecond. Assessment, calculation, disappointment. "Hi, honey," she said, her tone polite but flat. "You cut your hair." "Yeah." "It's shorter." "Hair grows." She nodded and moved past me. Elena leaned in slightly. "She's been stressed all week about tonight." "Why?" I asked. "She invited the new neighbors and Uncle Ray's bringing his girlfriend, and," she lowered her voice playfully, "she wants everything perfect." Perfect. That word again. I helped set the table, placed forks, adjusted napkins, avoided looking at the empty chair at the far end. That used to be mine, until Elena passed the bar. Now she sat beside Mom. I sat wherever there was space. By the time everyone arrived, the house was buzzing. Coats piled up, wine poured, laughter layered over old resentments like frosting over a cracked cake. Uncle Ray clapped me on the back. "How's work, kiddo?" "It's good," I said. "What are you doing now?" his girlfriend asked politely. I opened my mouth. "Elena just closed a 7-figure corporate merger," Mom interrupted from across the room. Of course she did. Everyone turned toward my sister. "Oh, wow, that's incredible. At your age?" Elena blushed modestly, but pleased. It was a team effort. Mom beamed like she personally argued the case. I swallowed the rest of my sentence. No one noticed. Dinner was finally served. The turkey was golden, candles flickered, crystal glasses chimed. Mom stood at the head of the table. She loved this part. She tapped her wine glass lightly with a fork. "Before we eat," she said, smiling wide, "I just want to say how thankful I am this year." Here it comes, I thought. She looked at Elena first. "I have one daughter who is a famous lawyer, a powerhouse, someone who makes this family proud every single day." Applause around the table, laughter, admiration. Elena looked embarrassed, but pleased. Then my mother turned her head slightly, toward me. And I have another daughter, she continued, her voice light, almost playful, a beggar. Laughter. Actual laughter. I didn't breathe. I thought I misheard her, but she was smiling. People thought it was a joke. Uncle Ray chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, come on, Linda." Mom waved a hand dismissively. "Well, she's always between things, aren't she, sweetheart?" My ears rang. Between things. That's what she called it. My contract work, my non-profit gigs, the months I spent building community programs that didn't pay six figures. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, waiting for me to laugh, to accept the punchline. I picked up my wine glass slowly, took a sip, set it down. "You forgot a detail," I said calmly. Mom blinked. "What's that?" "A beggar asks, I don't." The table shifted. She laughed again, but thinner this time. "Oh, honey, it's a figure of speech." "A beggar asks, I don't." Elena shifted in her seat. "Let's just eat," she murmured. But Mom wasn't done. "You could have gone to law school too," she said lightly. There it was, the old script. "You chose whatever this is." I felt something inside me click into place. Calm. Dangerous calm. "Say it," I said. She frowned. "Say what?" "What you think I chose." The room went very still. She set her fork down. "You chose instability." No one spoke. Even the football game in the living room seemed quieter. I leaned back in my chair. "You know what's funny?" I said softly. "What?" she replied sharply. "I almost didn't come tonight." Elena glanced at me. "Why?" Mom demanded. "Because I knew you'd need an audience." Her face flushed slightly. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I looked around the table, at the neighbors, at Uncle Ray, at my father staring down at his plate. "You introduced her as a famous lawyer. You introduced me as a beggar." "It was a joke," she snapped. "No, it wasn't." Silence again. Elena reached for her wine. "Can we not do this?" she said under her breath. I turned to her. "Do what?" "This thing you do." "What thing?" "Make everything dramatic." I stared at her. "You think I made that dramatic?" Mom stood abruptly. "I will not be attacked in my own home." I almost smiled. Attacked. That's what accountability feels like to someone who's never had to taste it. "I'm not attacking you," I said calmly. "I'm correcting the record." "Fine," she said tightly. "Correct it." I looked at her. Really looked at her. "You have two daughters. One built a career in a system that rewards aggression. The other built programs for women who can't afford lawyers." The room shifted. Mom rolled her eyes. "And how much does that pay?" she shot back. I held her gaze. "Enough." She laughed again. "There it is. Always vague." My hands folded neatly in my lap. "You want specifics?" She didn't answer, so I gave them anyway. I secured 3 grants this year. One of them was a 6-figure. The room went silent. Elena's head snapped toward me. "What?" she said. Mom blinked. "You don't run a nonprofit." "No," I replied. "I consult for them." Her mouth opened slightly. "Since when?" "Last year." "Why didn't you tell us?" I tilted my head. "You never asked." The weight of that sentence settled over the table like snow. Elena's expression shifted. Confusion, then something else. Calculation. Mom's fingers tightened, grasped her napkin. "That doesn't make you successful," she said quickly. "No," I agreed softly, "but it doesn't make me a beggar either." My hands folded neatly in my lap. "You want specifics?" She didn't answer, so I gave them anyway. I secured 3 grants this year. One of them was a 6-figure. The room went silent. Elena's head snapped toward me. "What?" she said. Mom blinked. "You don't run a nonprofit." "No," I replied. "I consult for them." Her mouth opened slightly. "Since when?" "Last year." "Why didn't you tell us?" I tilted my head.
You never asked. The weight of that sentence settled over the table like snow. Elena's expression shifted. Confusion, then something else. Calculation. Mom's fingers tightened, grasped her napkin. That doesn't make you successful, she said quickly. No, I agreed softly, but it doesn't make me a beggar either. My hands folded neatly in my lap. You want specifics? She didn't answer, so I gave them anyway. I secured 3 grants this year. One of them was a 6-figure. The room went silent. Elena's head snapped toward me. What? She said. Mom blinked. You don't run a nonprofit. No, I replied. I consult for them. Her mouth opened slightly. Since when? Last year. Why didn't you tell us? I tilted my head.
The word just
You
sat
never
there.
asked.
Affirm.
The weight of
It didn't explode, it didn't echo, it just lingered in the air like smoke, curling around the chandelier and settling into every confused face at that table. Elena blinked first. Affirm? She repeated carefully, like she was testing the pronunciation of something foreign. Mom let out a short laugh. What kind of firm? Her tone was light, dismissive, already preparing to shrink whatever I said next. I didn't rush. Legal. That did it. The silence changed shape. Elena's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Uncle Ray stopped chewing. Even my father slowly lowered his fork. Mom's smile faltered. That's not funny, she said. I'm not joking. Elena's eyes narrowed. You're not licensed. I'm not practicing. Then how? I invested. There it was. The missing piece. The room tilted again. Mom leaned back in her chair, staring at me like she was trying to solve a math problem that refused to balance. With what money? She asked sharply. I almost laughed. With the money I didn't beg for. Uncle Ray coughed to hide a grin. Elena set her wine glass down slowly, too slowly. You don't just invest in a law firm. That's not a bakery. That's not a coffee shop. It's regulated. I know. Her jaw tightened. Which firm? I hesitated just long enough to make it matter. Caldwell and Pierce. The reaction was immediate. Elena went pale. Mom blinked rapidly. That's downtown. Yes. That's a major litigation firm. Yes. Elena's voice was very quiet now. They represent corporate clients. And nonprofits, I added gently. Her eyes snapped to mine. You don't have that kind of capital. You're right, I said. I didn't. Mom looked between us like she was watching a tennis match. Stop speaking in riddles, she snapped. How? I folded my hands on the table. 2 years ago, Caldwell and Pierce was bleeding clients in their public interest division. They were hemorrhaging money on cases that didn't align with their corporate portfolio. Elena stared at me. I know the firm, she said slowly. They don't just open their doors to random consultants. I wasn't random. Her eyes sharpened. I continued calmly. I approached them with data, projections, a restructuring plan. I offered to build out a sustainable pro bono arm that would actually generate long-term grant funding. Mom looked lost. Elena did not. You wouldn't give you equity, she said flatly. I held her gaze. They did. The temperature in the room dropped. That's impossible. It's documented. Mom's lips parted slightly. You own part of a law firm? She asked. Yes. Elena's composure cracked just enough for me to see the strain beneath it. How much? She demanded. Enough. That word again, the one she'd mocked. Her fingers curled against the table. You don't understand what you're saying, she insisted. Equity partnerships aren't handed out. I didn't ask for one. Then what did you do? I negotiated. The way her face tightened told me everything. This wasn't about disbelief. It was about territory. Mom stood up again abruptly. So you're saying you're, what, on the same level now? Same level. There it was. The scoreboard. I looked at her carefully. I'm saying I'm not beneath anyone at this table. Elena exhaled slowly. When did this happen? 6 months ago. Her head jerked back slightly. 6 months, and you didn't tell us? I shrugged lightly. You were busy being famous. The words weren't sharp. They were factual, and somehow that made them cut deeper. Mom looked genuinely rattled now. Why would you keep something like that from your family? I met her eyes steadily. Because I didn't want it to be the only reason you respected me. The silence that followed was heavier than anything earlier. Elena looked down at her plate. Mom's mouth opened, then closed again. Across the table, the neighbors were pretending not to stare. My father finally spoke. You own part of Caldwell and Pierce? Yes. He nodded slowly. That's impressive. It was the first neutral statement he'd made all night. Mom shot him a look. Elena's voice was tight. What division? Public interest strategy. She swallowed. That's not corporate. No. It's not litigation. No. But it's under the firm. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, eyes calculating. So technically, you're part of the same industry. Technically. Mom let out a breath like she'd been holding it for an hour. Well, she said briskly, forcing a smile, that's wonderful. See, I always knew you'd land somewhere respectable. Respectable? I almost laughed out loud. 20 minutes ago, I was a beggar. Now I was respectable. Just like that. Elena wasn't smiling. She was thinking. Hard. Why Caldwell and Pierce? She asked quietly. Because they needed something they didn't know how to build. And you did? Yes. Her eyes searched mine. For someone who doesn't like the spotlight, you picked a very visible platform. I didn't pick visibility. I picked leverage. That word landed differently. Leverage. Mom shifted uncomfortably. What does that even mean? She asked. It means, I said calmly, I can decide which cases get funded, which initiatives expand, which communities get real representation. Uncle Ray let out a low whistle. So you're the money behind the curtain? I smiled faintly. Something like that. Elena's knuckles were white against her napkin. Does your firm know? Yes. And? And what? And what did they think about your side projects? I held her gaze. They're not side projects. The tension between us was no longer subtle. It was electric. Mom looked between us again. I don't understand why this feels like a competition, she muttered. I almost laughed. Because she had built the arena. Elena finally leaned forward. Are you planning to expand? I tilted my head. Why? Because Caldwell and Pierce competes with my firm. There it was. The crack. The real concern. Not my reputation, not my stability. Market overlap. I felt something settle inside me. Calm. Confident. Yes, I said softly. We are. The room seemed to shrink. In what direction? She asked carefully. Strategic acquisitions. Mom blinked again. You're acquiring more? Possibly. Elena stared at me for a long moment. Then she said something that almost made me smile. You've changed. I shook my head. No, I just stopped explaining myself. And for the first time that evening, she didn't have a comeback. The turkey was cold, the candles were burning low, but no one moved because something had shifted at that table. Not just the power, the story. For years, I had been the footnote, the unstable one, the between-things daughter. And now, they didn't know where to place me. Mom cleared her throat awkwardly. Well, she said, forcing brightness back into her tone, I suppose we have 2 successful daughters after all. I looked at her steadily. I suppose you do. But even as she said it, I could see the discomfort behind her eyes. Because success was simple when it followed her script. This was unpredictable. Elena pushed her plate away slightly. Are you planning to stay in the city? Yes. Long term? Yes. She nodded slowly. Interesting. The way she said it told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because what they didn't know yet is that Caldwell and Pierce wasn't just expanding, we were circling something very specific. And when Elena's phone buzzed in her lap a few seconds later and I saw her glance at the notification and freeze, I knew the next move had already begun. She looked up at me slowly. You wouldn't, she said under her breath. I held her gaze. Wouldn't what? That was the question hanging in the air, and I didn't answer it. I just reached for my wine and smiled.
Fingers tightened around her phone like it had just burned her. Mom noticed. What is it? She asked quickly, eyes darting between us again. Elena didn't answer right away. She was staring at the screen, jaw set, eyes moving as she reread whatever had just landed in her inbox. I didn't need to see it. I already knew. Is something wrong? Uncle Ray asked. Elena finally looked up at me. You're bidding, she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. I tilted my head slightly. On? Don't play dumb. I gave her a small smile. I've never been good at that. Her voice sharpened. You're bidding on Harper and Klein. The name rippled around the table. Even Mom had heard of them. Boutique litigation firm, strong corporate portfolio, a direct competitor to Elena's firm. I folded my hands calmly. We're exploring strategic partnerships. That's not what this says, she shot back, holding up her phone slightly before stopping herself from showing it to the whole table. Mom's eyes widened. Wait, that's your rival firm, isn't it? Elena didn't look away from me. Yes. The air felt thin now. My father slowly removed his glasses and set them on the table. And Caldwell and Pierce is trying to acquire them, he asked carefully. Possibly, I said. Elena let out a disbelieving laugh. You said you weren't competitive. I'm not, I replied evenly. I'm strategic. Her eyes flashed. This would undercut my firm's expansion into the nonprofit litigation space. I shrugged lightly. Markets shift. Mom looked like she might faint. Are you two seriously fighting over law firms at Thanksgiving? I turned to her slowly. No one's fighting. Elena stood abruptly. Yes, we are. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. This isn't a coincidence, she said, voice low but sharp. You knew we were courting Harper and Klein. I didn't blink. I read industry reports. You had inside information. I had publicly available data. Her breathing had changed, quick, controlled. You're leveraging your nonprofit arm to sweeten the deal. You're offering grant-backed funding to offset their risk. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it. And that silence told her everything. Mom pressed her fingers to her temples. I don't understand why this feels hostile. Elena let out a short laugh. Because it is. I stood slowly this time. Not aggressive, not rushed, just steady. You built your entire identity on being the only one at this table in the legal world, I said quietly. Her eyes flickered. That's not true. It is. You're twisting this. No, I replied. I just stepped into the same room. The neighbors were frozen. Uncle Ray looked like he wished he'd brought popcorn. Mom's voice cracked slightly. I wanted you both to succeed. I looked at her. No, I said gently. You wanted one of us to win. That landed harder than anything else. Elena's shoulders squared. If you go through with this, she said, you're not just expanding, you're targeting. I stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear the softness in my voice. You called me dramatic earlier. She swallowed. This isn't drama, I continued. It's business. And if my firm loses the bid, then you adapt. Her lips parted slightly. You've changed, she whispered again. This time it wasn't accusation, it was realization. I stopped waiting for permission, I said. Silence settled over the table once more. Mom sank slowly into her chair. I can't believe this, she murmured. You announced one daughter as a famous lawyer and the other as a beggar, I said calmly. You set the stage. I was joking, she said, her eyes filling slightly. No, I replied. You were ranking. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Elena's phone buzzed again. She glanced down, then back up at me. They moved up the meeting, she said. I didn't react. To when? I asked. To Monday. I nodded once. Good. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're confident? I'm prepared. She studied my face for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not sweet, not sarcastic, sharp. May the best firm win, she said quietly. I held her gaze. It's not about winning. She tilted her head. No? It's about not kneeling. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and they hung there, heavier than I intended. Mom looked confused. Elena did not. She understood exactly what I meant. For years, I'd knelt at that table, smiled at the comparisons, accepted the narrative, let her shine unchallenged because I didn't care about the spotlight, but I did care about dignity. Elena extended her hand across the table, a formal gesture, professional. I took it. Her grip was firm, competitive, alive. See you Monday, she said. I'll be there. She picked up her coat. Mom was stunned. You're leaving? I have calls to make, Elena said calmly. Of course she did. She always moved fast. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. For what it's worth, she said, you were never a beggar. Then she walked out. The front door closed softly behind her. The house felt different now, quieter, uncertain. Mom stared at her empty chair. I didn't mean it, she murmured. I looked at her for a long moment. I know, I said, but knowing didn't erase it. My father cleared his throat. You surprised us tonight. I gave a small smile. I've been surprising people lately. Uncle Ray raised his glass. To both daughters. The toast was hesitant, uneven, but real. Glasses clinked. Turkey sat untouched. Mom looked at me again, something unfamiliar in her expression. Not disappointment, not pride, something closer to respect. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked quietly. I picked up my coat. Because I needed to know I could do it without your applause. She didn't respond. I walked toward the door. The night air was cold, crisp, clean. I stepped onto the porch and paused. Behind me, the house buzzed softly with leftover conversation. Ahead of me, the streetlights glowed steady and calm. My phone buzzed. A message from my business partner. Harper & Klein interested. Monday decisive. I smiled slightly. Across town, my sister was probably already drafting counteroffers, preparing, strategizing. For the first time in our lives, we were on equal ground. Not as golden child and afterthought, not as famous lawyer and beggar, just two women who refused to be small. I walked down the steps slowly, and as I reached my car, I caught my reflection in the window. Same face, same eyes, different story. If this dinner felt like a battlefield, if you've ever been labeled, ranked, underestimated at your own table, hit like on this video. Share it with someone who's ever been called less than they are. And subscribe, because some rivalries don't end at Thanksgiving. They just move into boardrooms. And trust me, Monday is gonna be interesting.